All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. Welcome back to the Dharma Doors. I'm MC Owens, and this is the San Francisco Dharma Collective. And tonight, you guessed it, we're going to read another sutta. Tonight, we're still we're still making our way through the middle-length discourses, and we're moving on to sutta number 84, the Madhurā Sutta, the sutra or the teaching given at Madhurā. So Madhurā is the name of a place, and it's the name where this sutta takes place. Um, Before we dive into the sutta tonight, though, I want to quickly review the last few suttas that we've done, and I want to do that for a certain reason. So if you've been coming to Dharma Doors, which I know everybody here has, we are in this little section of the middle-length discourses. It's the Rajavagga. So it's the division of the kings. And so the theme or the connection of all of these next suttas is that there's a king involved. And when we first started this section, um, we had been looking at the section to the Paribhijacas, the division to the wanderers. And the idea is that the Buddha was talking to like forest dwelling yogis and ascetics. And so the message that he was delivering was very much geared towards, hardcore forest dwelling practitioners in that way, wanderers. But then we shifted to this section where the focus is on royalty and these different kings. And we might have missed it, or, as this has gone on, it might have just faded to the background. So I wanted to remind us that the first of the first sutta in the Rajavagga, so the first of them to the kings was the Gatikara Sutta. And if you remember, if you were here, Gatikara was a potter. He made pottery. And there is a Dharma teaching in that sutta. But really what that sutta is about, it's about the fact that the Buddha goes to see a king, and the king invites him over for lunch and, gives him food and all of that. And then that king invites the Buddha and the Sangha to stay at his place for the rainy season retreat. So to stay at his house for 3 months. And the Buddha says, "Oh, no thanks. We're already going to stay at Gatikara's place." And Gatikara is this lowly potter. But the Buddha says, but he is my number one supporter. And the focus of that teaching, as subtle as it might have been, it was about how, for the Buddha, the king's status didn't matter at all. To the king, or sorry, to the Buddha, the most important thing was the person's level of cultivation, their level of commitment. And Gatikara had the highest level of commitment to the Dharma. He had the utmost faith in the Buddha. And so that was an interesting sutta for pointing at a lowly worker and saying they're kind of superior to a king. So that sort of sets the theme for this little Rajavagga section. Then the next one that we read was about a young Brahmin guy who wants to renounce. His name's Ratapala. And Ratapala, after receiving permission to renounce, which was seemingly kind of the focus of the sutta, the Ratapala kind of winning over his parents to get him to renounce. But the actual teaching of that sutra is about a king, King Kurovya, who comes to a park where the monk Ratapala is meditating. And they have a conversation about the Dharma, and Ratapala explains to the king everything's impermanent, right? He explains to the king that everyone has to suffer their own physical pains by themselves. Nobody can actually give their pain to somebody else to suffer for them. He tells the king, collect as much stuff as you want. You don't get to take it with you. And he explains to the king that this world is insatiate, meaning you can't get enough of it. You will keep wanting more and more and more, and you will never be satisfied. So, what we may not have really emphasized when we discussed that sutta is that really radical message that Ratapala is giving to the king. And he's saying, like, yeah, you might be wealthy, but you don't get to take it with you. You might be wealthy, but your world is just as impermanent as the rest of the world. Yeah, you might be, wealthy, but you don't get to take it with you. You might be wealthy, but you have to suffer your own pain. So that sutta was really putting at an equal level everybody everybody being in the same impermanent, insatiable world in that sense. Then the sutta that we did last week, the third of these suttas, was the sutta to the king Makadeva. And that sutta that we talked about last week, that was a sutta about a king, and he was a good ruler. He ruled by the Dharma, so he was a Chakravartin. And as part of being a good ruler, and this is the point that I might not have stressed last week, in order, like for him, Makadeva, to be a good ruler, he set up a system of renunciation. And it's the system that when the king sees his first gray hair, he should stop being the king. And I look around our world and I look at our gray haired rulers and I think, it would be a good thing if they stepped aside and let the non gray haired people run. Like, wouldn't it be an amazing world if when people got gray hair, they just moved away from positions of power and leadership? So that was sort of the emphasis of last week's sutta in that way. There was a lot of different things going on, but I think the point to emphasize was that the king had set up a process of stepping down. And then it all started to fall apart when that one son didn't renounce. And even though he had gray hair, he stayed on as king. So that's the theme. So we're starting to see that the Buddha, or at least the teachings in this section, they're very different than the suttas that we've been reading for months and months that have been either much more focused on practice or much more focused on converting other practitioners. These suttas are more kind of almost like cultural commentary in that way, where it's kind of really focusing on the culture at the time. And that's going to be particularly true tonight. So tonight's sutta is one of those suttas that's interesting because there's no Buddha. It's one of those ones where the teaching is actually going to be given by a bhikkhu, by a monk, named Mahakachchana. Kachchana. Now, we probably haven't encountered Mahakatyana, that's his name in Sanskrit, or Kachchana in Pali. We probably haven't encountered him yet here, but I want everybody out there to know that the monk, the bhikkhu, that's the star of this sutta, Kachchana, he has his own sutta. In this collection of teachings, the Samyutta Nikāya, the connected discourses, there is the Kachchana Sutta, or the Kachchana Gotta Sutta, the teaching to Kachchana. And it's in section 12, and it's sutta number 15, if you want to go find it. But this is a really important sutta. In fact, at the SFDC a while ago, maybe a year or two ago or longer, I was up there and I gave a whole kind of retreat, just a day-long retreat on this particular sutta. And we went through it word by word. So Kachana and this sutta, this little sutta, it's only less than a page long in the Samyutta Nikāya. I can't tell you how important this sutta is for the development of Mahayana Buddhism. It is a fundamental sutta that is quoted often by Nagarjuna, the kind of the philosophical founder of the Mahayana tradition and the Madhyamaka school. He's always referring to this as like the sutta, and the focus of it again is this monk Kachchana. There's another sutta though that before we even read tonight's sutta, I want to share with you really quickly. So the other Kachchana sutta comes from this Nikāya. So this is the Anguttara Nikāya, the numerical discourses. Yeah, there's a lot of suttas in there. What makes this collection of suttas interesting is that it's divided into teachings that the Buddha gave in lists of two. So like shamatha vipassana, right? So like just two teachings. And then it's all the teachings he gave in threes, and then fours, and then fives, and then six. And in the section of the twos, there is a tiny little Kachchana Sutta, and I want to read it for you. Really, it's like a bonus sutta tonight. And it's just really simple, but it's actually a really great introduction to Kachchana before we read like the main sutta tonight. So again, this is in the section on twos. I'm reading sutta number 38, if you're interested. So it's 238. So on one occasion, the Venerable Mahakachchana was dwelling at Madhurā, the same location. Interesting. In Gunda's Grove, the exact same place. Then a Brahmin named Kandarayana approached the Venerable Mahakachchana and exchanged greetings with him. When they had concluded their greetings in cordial talk, he sat down to one side and he said to him, I have heard, Master Kachchana, I've heard this. I've heard that the ascetic Kachchana does not pay homage to Brahmins who are old, aged, burdened with years, advanced in life, who have come to the last stage. Nor does Mahakachchana stand up for them or offer them a seat. This is indeed true, for Master Kachchana does not pay homage to Brahmins who are old, aged, burdened by years, advanced in life, and come to the last stage. Nor does he stand up for them, nor offer them a seat. This is not proper for Master Kachchana. Brahman, Kachchana says, the Blessed One, the Arahat, the perfectly enlightened one, the Buddha, knowing and seeing, has proclaimed the stage of an elder, and he's spoken about, or he has stated, explained the stage of a youth. Even though someone is old, 80, 90, or even 100 years old, if they enjoy sensual pleasures, dwell in sensual pleasures, if they burn with a fever for sensual pleasures, if they're consumed with thoughts of sensual pleasures, if they're eager in their quest for sensual pleasures, then they are reckoned to be just a foolish child elder. But even though someone might be young, with nice dark black hair, endowed with the blessings of youth in the prime of their life, if they do not enjoy sensual pleasures, if they don't dwell in sensual pleasures, if they don't burn with a fever for sensual pleasures, if they're not consumed with thoughts of sensual pleasures, if they're not eager in their quest for sensual pleasures, then that youth is reckoned as a wise elder. When this was said, the Brahmin Kangiryana rose from his seat, arranged his robe over one shoulder, and bowed down with his head at the feet of all the young bhikkhus, all the young monks, saying, "You elders stand in the stage of elders. We youths, we stand at the stage of youths." And then it ends with the Brahmin saying, "Excellent, excellent, Master Kachana. Let Master Kachana consider me a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge for life." So, simple, simple little sutta, but it gives you a sense of where Kachana's coming from. So he's known, he has this reputation for not bowing down to Brahmins. And that brings us to tonight's sutta. So I just wanted you to have that little background story on him. Now, tonight's sutta. So again, this is Sutta 84 in the Majjhima Nikāya. And it goes a little something like this. "Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Venerable Mahakachchana was living at Madhurā in the Gunda Grove. King Avantiputta of Madhurā, he had heard, like the word on the street was, the recluse Kachchana is living at Madhurā in the Gunda Grove. Now, a good report of Master Kachchana has been spread to this effect. He is wise, discerning, sagacious, learned, articulate, and perspicacious. He is aged, and he is an arahat. It's good to see such arahats." Then King Avantiputta of Madhurā had a number of state carriages made ready, and mounting a state carriage, he drove out from Madhurā with the full pomp of royalty in order to see the Venerable Mahakachchana. He went thus as far as the road was passable for carriages, and then he got down from his carriage and he went forward on foot to the Venerable Mahakachchana. He exchanged greetings with him, and when this courteous and amiable talk was finished, he sat down to one side and he said, "Master Kachchana, the Brahmins, they say this: Brahmins are the highest caste. Those of any other caste are inferior. Brahmins are the fairest caste. Those of any other caste are inferior, or those of any other caste are dark. Only Brahmins are pure, not non-Brahmins. Brahmins alone are the sons of Brahma, the offspring of Brahma, born of Brahma's mouth, born of Brahma, created by Brahma, heirs of Brahma." What does Master Kachchana say about that? And Kachchana, just so you know, says, "Well, that's just a saying in the world, great king, that Brahmins are the highest caste. And there is a way whereby it can be understood how that statement of the Brahmins is just a saying of the world. All right, let's start there. So this sutta is a very famous sutta because it's one of the famous suttas where the Buddha, or at least Buddhism, through the mouth of Kaccana, but it's a famous sutta where the Buddhist tradition presents how it feels about the caste system. And so, just in the event that there's somebody out there that's not really familiar with this caste system, or if it's something you've kind of heard about, but you don't really know much about it, let's spend a few minutes just talking about that, the idea of the caste system. There's a number of really interesting ideas that I want to bring up. In fact, the first thing that I want to bring up is about the actual word caste. Like, so the word that we're talking about is C-A-S-T-E. So the first thing that we want to get really clear, and this is going to get a little complicated, so hold on. So the word caste, C-A-S-T-E, is an English word, all right? And it is, of course, not the word that is being used in our text. It is not the word, or even the very concept, is not what the Buddha would have been talking about. So we need to make that really clear. The word, the idea that the Buddha is talking about, or that Kaccana is talking about, is Varna, V-A-R-N-A. And we're going to talk about what Varna means in a moment. The word caste, as an English word, is actually coming to us through basically like Spanish, Portuguese, like Spanish, Portuguese. And that word casta, casta, that Spanish word is related to the English word cast, like to cast out. And it's a word that is originally, apparently, in Portuguese, is used for dividing up different kinds of animals. So and the casting, it's just about the movement of like putting these over there and putting those over there. That's what the word cast comes from, is this Spanish Portuguese word for to like cast over there, to cast over there. Then the Portuguese, they show up to the New World and they encounter all of the indigenous tribes of South America and eventually North America. And they use the word casta, where we get the word caste, they use that word casta to basically talk about the different divisions of, the indigenous people that they were running into clearly had these like social divisions among them in terms of like royalty or not, things like that. And so the Portuguese just sort of used this term to talk about different social strata. And it's that idea and relationship, it's that where we get the English word caste and what that kind of means. Then, when the English speaking world first started really caring about the culture of India in that way, and first started studying, or at least kind of, in a way, again, looking at the culture of India, they saw that the Indians used a social hierarchical system. And so in English, we chose to use that Spanish Portuguese derived word for what they were doing. So is everybody clear about the language here? So there's this caste word that really has no place in Indian culture. It has no place in that. What the Indian culture was talking about and what the Buddha is talking about is Varna. Now, we've come across this, or at least a word related to Varna before. Varna basically means color or like shade like different shades of a color. That idea of like the different shades is the Varna. I'm pretty sure, but I have yet to be able to lock this one down. But I'm pretty sure that the English word varnish comes from this Sanskrit Pali word varna. Varna is it's very superficial. In fact, the word varna is very much about the surface color in that way. And now that we know that varna, the word that the Buddha is using, the word that the sutta is using, Vano, in Pali it's Vano or Vana, but Varna is already been referenced in the text as I read it. And what it is, it's where the king says, "Hey, Master Kachyana, I hear this, that the Brahmins say that they're the highest Varna, the highest caste, that they are the fairest, whereas the other castes are darker. And indeed, you need to know that the Indian caste system, the Indian Varna system, yes, it is about occupation, like it is about your social position, but it is also about skin color. And the lighter the skin color, the higher the caste. The darker the skin color, the lower the caste. I'm just the messenger on this one. Like, please don't shoot the messenger, but that's what's going on. The sutta is going to reference it in a moment, but allow me to tell you really quickly. The general Varna system, again, the caste system, it's usually typically divided into four castes, sometimes a fifth outcast category is added, but the outcasts are not even part of the caste system, so it's not actually accurate to include them, even though they are an active member of Indian society. Nonetheless, there is the fifth outcast, but then the four main castes. The top, as stated in the sutta, is the Brahmin class or caste. As stated, the Brahmins have an intimate relationship with Brahma, the God, the creator God. So Brahmins are usually kind of spoken about as being the priestly class or priestly caste, but that's not actually totally true. Yes, if one is going to be a Brahmin, it you or sorry, if you are going to be a priest, then yeah, you need to be a Brahmin. But not all Brahmins are priests. Brahmins, especially in the modern world, Brahmins are just sort of the highest class in a way, the most prestigious, most educated, wealthiest, all of that in that way, in the modern world. And by the way, if I didn't mention it, the caste system is still very much alive and well in India. If you haven't heard, it's a point of contention and a point of argument by many people because it's a very problematic system. But very interesting that it appears in such an old Buddhist sutta. It kind of speaks to how old this caste system is. So the Brahmins are considered to be the top. The next, and I keep doing this gesture because it is understood to be a kind of a pyramid situation where you have a very elite few at the top, and then as you move down, it's like more of a supporting base. So as you move down, you move to the Kshatriya class. Kahatya in Pali, Kshatriya in Sanskrit, traditionally called the warrior class. I know that when I was in undergraduates taking my classes in Hinduism, they were the priestly class or caste and the warrior caste. Again, not all Kshatriyas are warriors in any sense, but if you are a warrior in that way, you are definitely going to be part of the Kshatriya class. But Kshatriya, from what I can tell etymologically, Kshatriya has to do with like owning stuff. Like, and this is where they would be like householders and that, but like property owners, a wealthy class in that way. And again, the Brahmins are traditionally this kind of sacred caste, pure, um, everything that the king said about them being children of Brahma, they're pure, they're fair, all of that. That's the Brahmins. The Kshatriya are considered a little more rough around the edges in that way. And they might have gotten all of their wealth by plundering. That's where you get the warrior owners relationship in that way. But the Kshatriyas are this second class. And in the more modern world, they will talk about the Kshatriyas as being more of the political class, the sort of the movers and shakers of the world, like the real administrators, the ones that kind of make society work in that sense. That's going to be distinct from the Vaishyas. So the Vesa or Vaishya caste is the third, and they're considered the merchant caste. The buyers and the sellers, probably Gatikara, our potter, is probably a Vaishya in that way. So that's the third class caste. And then the bottom, the fourth caste, are the Shudra. In Pali, they are the Suddha or Shudra in Sanskrit. And that's the worker class. But we're talking about like janitors, garbage men, dealing with the dead. And on that point, by the way, the low caste, the Shudra, they they can deal with the dead. And the reason why I'm stressing that is it's helpful to understand how intense this caste system is. This caste system can be like really intense to the point that a member of an upper caste won't even touch a member of the lower caste. And the reason why that is that within Indian culture, there is a real sensitivity to something called jutta. Jutta. There is no English translation of jutta besides using the very, very childish schoolyard idea of cooties. You know how you could catch cooties from people? Well, jutta is a lot like cooties. And what it is it's that if you like work with like a sewer system, or if you work with like the dead, you are defiled, but not just like dirty. You have this metaphysical jutta from your work, and you can spread that jutta. And so people that are of an upper caste that don't come into contact with sewage systems and the dead, they're probably not going to touch somebody who does. And then that cooties jutta system, it goes all the way up to where the Brahmins are considered the most pure, the least jutta in that way. All right, that's pretty much our quick review of the caste system. You should know that the four varnas, those four castes that I just gave you, are very, very broad categories. And the actual varna system is divided even further into subcategories. And then, of course, related to the whole jutta thing I was just talking about, of course, what happens in Indian society is that you are only supposed to marry within your caste. It's very culturally problematic for people to marry above or below their caste. So that's where you get a lot of arranged marriages in Indian culture because they're trying to maintain that jutta situation and all of that. So you kind of need to know all of this to appreciate where the sutta is going tonight. Like you really need to appreciate how basically kind of racist this is to the point of, not even having contact with people. Okay. Again, any questions, comments, or ideas about the caste system before we find out more? Okay. Uh, if we have time at the end, I have one more thing to say about the caste system, but let's get to the sutta though. So, so the king says, "Hey, I've heard the Brahmins say." Now, remember, the king is not a Brahmin. He would probably be a Kshatriya. The king says, I've heard the Brahmins say that they're the highest caste, that everybody else is inferior. They say Brahmins are the fairest, everybody else is darker. They say only Brahmins are pure, everybody else is not pure. That they alone are children of Brahma. And Katyayana says, yeah, that's just what people say. That's just talk. That's just what they say. And then Katyayana turns it around to the king. And he says, what do you think, Maharaja? What do you think, great king? If a Kshatriya, a Katya, so in this version, Bhikkhu Bodhi translates Kshatriya as a noble person. Now, I wouldn't translate it as noble because we like to use the word noble for arhat. So it gets complicated. And also, Kshatriyas, again, are either like landowners or warriors or something like that. But they are an upper caste in that sense. So, great king, what do you think? If a Kshatriya, a noble Kshatriya, prospers in wealth, prospers in grain, silver or gold, will there be other noble Kshatriyas who rise before them and retire after that Kshatriya, who are eager to serve them, who seek to please them and speak sweetly to them? And will there also be Brahmins and Vaishyas and Shudras who do likewise? And the king replies, there will be, Master Katyayana. And Katyayana continues and says, but what do you think, great king? If a Brahmin prospers in wealth and grain and silver or gold, will there be other Brahmins who rise before him and rest or go to sleep after him, who are eager to serve them, who seek to please them and speak sweetly to them? And will there also be Vaishyas and Shudras and Kshatriyas who do likewise? There will be, Master Katyayana. And what do you think, great king? If there were a Vaishya, a merchant, who prospered in wealth, grain, silver, or gold, will there be other Vaishya merchants who rise before them and retire after them, who are eager to serve them, who seek to please them and speak sweetly about them? And will there also be Shudras and Kshatriyas and Brahmins who do likewise? The king replied, there will be, Master Katyayana. And what do you think, great king? If a Shudra prospers in wealth, grain, silver, or gold, will there be other Shudra workers who rise before them and retire after them, who are eager to serve them, who seek to please them and speak sweetly about them? And will there also be other Kshatriyas and Brahmins and Vaishyas who do likewise? The king replied, there will be, Master Katyana. And Katyana says, well then, what do you think, great king? If that's so, then are these four castes all the same? Or are they not? How does it appear in your case? Like, what do you think? Surely, if that is so, Master Katyana, then these four castes are all the same. There's no difference between them that I see. That is one way, great king, whereby it can be understood how that statement of the Brahmins is just a saying in the world. All right, so does everybody kind of see Katyana's point? This is a very important kind of Buddhist position concerning kind of the world in that way. So this is what I was kind of getting at, that this sutta is sort of more of an insight into like the culture of Buddhism. And what is the cultural Buddhist attitude towards social hierarchies? Well, the attitude is this. And does everybody get the example? Right? No? So basically he's saying that like if somebody gets really rich, like so let's say well, let's put it this way. Let's say there was a Catholic priest. So let's just put it in American culture. So let's say there was a Catholic priest who got rich. Might there be other priests and Catholics that would want to like help and serve that priest and be near that wealth? Like, wouldn't that wealth attract, people in that way? And wouldn't that happen if it was a senator, if it was an office worker, or if it was a janitor or whatever? Wouldn't the same thing happen that if somebody gets wealth, there's going to be other people that start glomming onto them to try to leech their wealth? So really, it doesn't matter if you're a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or a Vaishya or a Shudra, because if you get wealth, the same thing will happen to all of you. The king agrees. The king says, well, if you put it that way, Katyana, yeah, they're all the same. But that's Katyana's first point. Let's read about his second point. So his second point, he says, this is section 6. He says, well, what do you think, great king? Suppose a Kshatriya, suppose a noble Kshatriya were to kill living beings, take what has not been given, i.e. steal things. Suppose a Kshatriya were to misconduct themselves in sensual pleasures, speak falsely, suppose they were to speak maliciously, suppose they were to speak harshly, gossip, be covetous, have a mind of ill will and anger, and hold the wrong view. By the way, those are the 10 unwholesome actions or 10 unwholesome states. On the dissolution of the body, meaning after they die, after death, would they be likely to reappear in a state of deprivation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell? Or not? Or how does it appear to you? How does it appear in your case? And the king says, if a noble Kshatriya were such as that, Master Katyana, they would be likely to reappear in a state of deprivation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. That's how it appears to me in my case, or in this case, and that's what I heard from the arhats. So that's what I've heard from the noble arhats. And Katyana says, good, good, great king. What you think is good, and what you've heard from the arhats is good. And what do you think, great king? Suppose a Brahmin or a Vaishya merchant or a Shudra worker, suppose any one of them were to kill living beings, take what has not been given, abuse their sexuality, gossip, all of the other 10 things. Suppose they were to do all those, all the way up to holding the wrong view. On the dissolution of the body after death, would they all be likely to reappear in a state of deprivation, in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell? Or not? How does it appear to you in this case? And the king replies, yeah, if a Brahmin or a Vaishya merchant or a Shudra worker were such, doing all of those things, then yes, Master Katyana, they would be likely to reappear in a state of deprivation in an unhappy destination, in perdition, even in hell. That's how it appears to me in this case. And thus I have heard from the arhats. Good, good, great king. What you think is good, great king, and what you've heard from the arhats is good. And what do you think, great king? If all of that is so, then are these 4 castes all the same, or are they not? How does it appear to you in this case? Surely if that is so, Master Katyana, then these 4 castes are all the same. There's no difference between them all that I can see. That is also a way, great king, whereby it can be understood how that statement of the Brahmins is just a saying of the world. So it's kind of the exact opposite, right? So let's say that a member of any of the castes basically gets a lot of merit, gets a lot of wealth in that way. Isn't that good in that way for all 4? And then the opposite of that is, let's say any one of the 4 kill beings, steal things, and so on. Aren't they all going to receive the same karmic consequences? Does karma care if you're a king or a Shudra worker? And the Buddhist position here, Katyana's position, is that karma does not care about your social position. There's karmic consequences for lying, for example, and it's the same for everybody in that way. So, very, very important Buddhist point to be understanding, that social class has nothing to do with karma in that way. All right. Any questions about number 1, number 2? By the way, Katyana has 5 different points. All right. Number 3. What do you think, great king? Suppose a noble Kshatriya were to abstain from killing living beings, were to abstain from taking what has not been given, were to abstain from misconduct and sensual pleasures, abstain from false speech, malicious speech, harsh speech, and from gossip, and abstain from being covetous, from having a mind of ill will, and from holding the wrong view. On the dissolution of the body after death, would they be likely to reappear in a happy destination, even in a heavenly world, or not? Or how does it appear in your case, to you in this case? And the king says, if a noble Kshatriya were such, Master Katyana, they would be likely to reappear in a happy destination, even in a heavenly world. That's how it appears to me in this case, and that's how I've heard it from the Arhats. Good, good, great king. What you think is good, and what you've heard from the Arhats is good. And what do you think, great king? Suppose a Brahmin or a Vaishya merchant or a Shudra worker were to abstain from killing living beings, abstain from taking what has not been given, abstain from all of the 10 unwholesome actions. On the dissolution of the body after death, would they be likely to reappear in a happy destination, even in a heavenly world, or not? How does it appear to you in this case? And of course, the king replies, if a Brahmin or a Vaishya or a Shudra were such, then Master Kaccana, they would be likely to reappear in a happy destination, even in a heavenly world. That's how it appears to me in this case, and that's what I've heard from the Arhats. Good, good, great king. It's good what you think, and it's good what you've heard from the Arhats. And what do you think, great king? If that's so, then are these 4 castes all the same, or are they not? Or how does it appear to you in this case? Surely if that is so, Master Kaccana, then these 4 castes are all the same. That's how it appears to us in this case. All right. Everybody okay with that one? Same idea, but now if you were to not commit the 10 unwholesome actions, the karmic repercussions of that are the same. Doesn't matter in that way. Number 4. And what do you think, great king? Suppose a noble kshatriya were to break into houses, plunder wealth, commit banditry, ambush highways, or seduce other people's spouses. And if your men arrested such a person and then produced him saying, "Sire, this is the culprit. Command what punishment for him you wish," how would you treat him, great king? And the king replied, well, we would have them executed, Master Kaccana, or we would have them fined, or we would have them exiled, or we would do with him as they deserved. And why is that? Because they have lost their former status of being a Brahmin, or they've lost their former status of being a Kshatriya warrior in that way. And they are simply reckoned to be a robber. And what do you think, great king? And he does the same, of course, for the other 3 castes and the same scenario. And he says, what do you think, great king? If all of that is so, if you would have the same punishment, regardless of caste, what do you think, great king? If that is so, then are these 4 castes all the same, or are they not? How does it appear in your case? And the king says, surely that is so, Master Kaccana. Then these 4 castes are all the same. There's no difference between them all that I can see. And Kaccana, of course, says, and that's also one way, great king, whereby it can be understood how that statement of the Brahmins is just a saying in the world. Questions about that one? And then finally, the 5th of Kaccana's arguments in that way, or his rhetorical arguments. What do you think, great king? Suppose a noble Kshatriya, having shaved off their hair and beard, suppose they put on the yellow robe and went forth from home life into homelessness, where they abstained from killing living beings, from taking what has not been given, and from abstained from false speech. They refrain from eating at night, And let's say they would only eat during one part of the day, and they would be celibate, virtuous, of good character. How would you treat them? The king replied, "Oh, we would pay homage to that person, Master Kachana, or we would rise up for them, or invite them to be seated, or we would invite them to accept robes, alms food, a resting place, medicinal requisites, or we would arrange for them lawful guardianship, defense, and protection." And why is that? Because they have lost their former status of being a Kshatriya noble and are now simply reckoned as a recluse. And what do you think, great king? Suppose a Brahmin or a Vaishya or a Shudra, having shaved off their hair and beard and went from home life into homelessness and did all of the rest, including being celibate, virtuous, and of good character. How would you treat all of them? The king replied, "Oh, we would pay homage to them, Master Kachana, or we would rise up for them, or invite them to be seated, or we would invite them to accept robes, alms food, a resting place, medicinal requisites, or we would arrange for them to have lawful guardianship, defense, and protection." And why is that? Because they would have lost their former status as a Brahmin or a Vaishya or a Shudra, and they would be simply reckoned as a recluse. And what do you think, great king? If that's so, then are these four castes not all the same, or are they not? How does it appear in your case? Surely, if that is so, Master Kachana, then these four castes are all the same. There's no difference between them all that I can see. And that is also a way, great king, whereby it can be understood how that statement of the Brahmins is just a saying in the world. All right, so those are the five kind of rhetorical arguments of Kachana about the equality of the castes. Any thoughts, any questions or ideas about all of that? Yeah, no.
I have two questions. So my first question is, are people of any caste, were people of any caste at the time of this tale permitted to become or to renounce equally? Was there no preference to one class or another?
Oh yeah, from the beginning, the Sangha, the Buddha opened the gates to everybody. And I've mentioned this before, but the inclusion of women in the Sangha was very radical at that time. Including other castes was radical, but including women and women from lower castes, mind blowing. So,
More radical.
yeah.
My other question is about rebirth.
Hmm.
Does the caste system play into rebirth at all in the way that people were thinking of it at the time?
So I will talk about, I told you there was one idea that I have here that I wasn't maybe going to mention, but since you ask, we have to talk about it. So here's the thing about it, and we can't go too far down this road, mainly because I'm not an expert in this. So I don't want to talk too out of turn in that way. But I do want everybody to know that there is you probably already know of it, but there is a very, very famous Indian religious text, let's just call it a religious text, called the Bhagavad Gita. The Gita, the song of the Bhagavan, of the world honored one, of the Lord. But they don't mean the Buddha. It's not that Bhagavan. No, the Bhagavad Gita, the song of the Lord, is a kind of basically a very classic Hindu text. And it's actually one small part of a much larger epic poem, all right, called the Mahabharata. But the Bhagavad Gita, this tiny text, is a very, very famous. I mean, again, you've probably heard of it. And like any religious text, the message or the meaning of it is interpretable, debatable. But the mainstream interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita is this. So, very, very quickly, the story is that there is a Kshatriya warrior named Arjuna or Arjun, who is a archer. And he is in this giant battle. And this battle, by the way, has been like brewing and mounting for a very long time. And the Bhagavad Gita takes place on the battlefield of this epic battle. And the warrior Arjuna is in his chariot getting ready to charge. And he looks out across the battlefield and he sees his cousins. He sees distant relatives of his on the other side. And he starts to have doubts about this whole war business. He starts to have these kind of thoughts that maybe it's about peace, that maybe it's about not fighting. And at that very moment that he's starting to doubt, his charioteer turns around and reveals himself to be Krishna, reveals himself to be an avatar of Vishnu, reveals himself to be God. And God tells Arjun, your dharma, your truth, your life's purpose, your dharma, is to be a warrior. Your father was a warrior, your father's father was a warrior, your children will be warriors. Your dharma is to war. And Krishna, God, begins to explain in the Bhagavad Gita that the entire cosmic order of the universe is maintained when everybody stays in their caste and does what they're supposed to do. And so ultimately, Krishna, God, convinces Arjun to fulfill his dharma. And the basic idea of that kind of form of Hinduism, it's the idea that if you this gets tricky, but if you figure out what it is you're supposed to do in this life, like you've kind of figure out your dharma, your personal truth, if you live according to that truth, not only will you maintain the cosmic order, you are guaranteeing yourself a better rebirth. So this is where we get to Noam's question regarding kind of the caste system and rebirth. So what they say is that if you are a lowly Shudra, you are sweeping the streets, what they say is it's your karma, it's your dharma to have been born in that position. If you fulfill that position and do it well, you'll be reborn as a Vaishya next time. And then if you're a good merchant, the best merchant you could be reborn as a Kshatriya. And then if you're a good Kshatriya warrior class person and fulfill your dharma, you could be reborn as a Brahmin. And now you have a chance of liberation. Now you have a chance at mukti, of moksha. Now you have a chance of getting out of samsara because you are a Brahmin with a kind of direct line to Brahma. Get me out of here. Other castes don't have a direct line to Brahma. So part of the whole Bhagavad Gita Hindu folklore thing is the reason why the castes are the way they are is a divine cosmic order. And if people start stepping out of their social position, the whole universe will fall apart. That's kind of the quick presentation of the ideology that the Buddha and Buddhism is going deeply against. Because the Buddha is very much encouraging people to not. um, and now, actually, if you hear all of that and you know, like, oh, they're using the word Dharma that way in the Bhagavad Gita and in the Hindu tradition, Dharma is about like your truth, not exactly the truth. But what's interesting about the Buddhist tradition is the Buddha basically says, nah, we all have the same Dharma. We actually all, and that is voiced in this sutra in a very subtle way by saying, no, actually, karma works the same for everybody. And if we go back to the Ratipala Sutta, the second one, where he was saying, nope, the world's impermanent. And that's true for everybody. It's not that the rich people's world is permanent. Nah, they lose it too. They lose children too. They lose everything. Like, so if we go back to that sutra, and actually I'm glad we have time because I want to talk a little bit more about Kachana's thing about that it's just a worldly saying. It's just what they say in the world that the Brahmins are the highest caste. I want to get back to that, but no.
Yeah, I just want to follow up because
Yeah.
in the way in some of the examples that they were giving, the king was saying, yeah, you're right. It's the same if, anyone from any of these castes does these good things or does these bad things, they're going to have a better rebirth or a worse rebirth. So that's why I was asking, because it implies that they're going to have the rebirth to the animal realm or the god's realm, not a rebirth to a different caste, because otherwise
Ah,
the king would be like, yeah, they'll be reborn better, but not equally. Whereas the implication was that it would be equal, which is what,
yes.
right?
Yeah, and that's a good point, Noam, that the rebirth they're talking about is not rebirth in the within the caste system,
Right.
but it's about no, if anybody does good, they're have the potential to kind of go to heaven in that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just want to
Hmm.
make sure I understood.
Yeah. All right. Well, I'm glad I got to talk about the Bhagavad Gita idea because that is very relevant to caste talk. Let's quickly talk about that last part. So, or not that, oh, actually, I need to finish reading this sutta because there's something very important that we haven't actually gotten to yet. So let's do that first. So, for the last time, Kachana says, yeah, that's all just a saying in the world that the Brahmins are the best. Now, section 10, paragraph 10. When all of this was said, King Avantiputta of Madhura said to the venerable Mahakachana, magnificent, Master Kachana! Magnificent, Master Kachana! Master Kachana has made the Dharma clear in many ways, as though he were turning upright what had been overturned, revealing what had been hidden, showing the way to one who is lost, or holding up a lamp in a dark room for those with eyesight to see forms. I go to Master Kachana for refuge, and to the Dharma, and to the Sangha of bhikkhus. From today, let Master Kachana remember me as a lay follower who has gone to him for refuge for life. Do not go to me for refuge, great king. Go for refuge to that same blessed one to whom I've gone for refuge. So don't It's not me. Don't go to refuge for me. Take refuge in the Buddha. And the king says, yeah, where's he living now, Master Kachana? That blessed one, accomplished and fully enlightened. And Kachana tells him, that blessed one, accomplished and fully enlightened, has attained final nirvana. If we heard that the blessed one was within 10 leagues, we would go 10 leagues in order to see that blessed one, accomplished and fully enlightened. If we heard that the blessed one was within 20 leagues, or 30 leagues, or 40 leagues, or 50 leagues, or 100 leagues, we would go 100 leagues in order to see the blessed one, the accomplished and fully enlightened. But since that blessed one has attained final nirvana, we go to that blessed one for refuge, and to the Dharma, and to the Sangha of Bhikkhus. From today, let Master Kachana remember me as a lay follower who has gone for refuge for life. So I do believe this is our first sutta that is post-mortem, like that is after the life of the Buddha. Quite a surprise. Last Sunday when I was reading it, I was like, whoa. So we had to get to that part. That was significant. That definitely sort of it raises a very interesting point. It raises the interesting point that the suttas are in no way chronological. These do not go from like the Dharmachakrapavartana Sutta, like the very first sutta, to the Parinirvana Sutta. So like we see here, it's just like, nope. At this point, the Buddha had already entered Parinirvana. So, but it's kind of one of the things that I love about Buddhism is that it doesn't have such obsession with historicity. It's like much more interested in the message in that way than about these chronologies. It's kind of an interesting Western fixation, the chronology in that sense. All right, so unless there's any comments about that last part, I want to just say something really quickly about this subtle idea about that Katyana keeps talking about, that when the king says, yeah, don't people say Brahmins are the best, like the highest, best caste? And he's like, yeah, that's what they say, right? But that's just like talk of the world. I think a really important idea, and I almost regret even just sort of like throwing this in at the end. It's kind of a whole Dharma talk, but it's a very Buddhist idea, a very Buddhist understanding to kind of, I guess, let's think about it. I don't actually know how I can even say this because it's about language in that way. But what I want you to think about is, I guess, a baby. But what I'm thinking about is, I want you to think about like your, not you necessarily, but one's ability to think about something. It requires that they have and have learned the words in order to then think about that thing. What I mean is that a baby is probably not sitting around thinking about the Pythagorean theorem, right? Like how to solve an algebraic equation. And a baby probably isn't sitting around thinking about how to solve algebraic equations because they just haven't had that conditioning yet, right? And so I want us to really think for a moment about the relationship between thinking and language, meaning having words to think about things. And this is kind of a deep like philosophy of language idea, but it's actually this really deep question about it's about the nature or reality of that which we don't have words for. Do those things exist? The immediate question would be what things, right? And right there, you notice like if you don't have words, you don't have thoughts about that thing. And what I'm kind of getting at is that there's a very kind of a common understanding of language. And the very, very common understanding of language, it's the idea that things just exist and words are just labels put on them. This is a very common idea about, it's wrong, by the way. It's not true, but it's the way that we think. And by the way, how could I even say this? Wow. The, the Western mythological structure, the Western mythological structure of language is presented in the first book of the Bible in Genesis. And what it is, it's the idea that God gave Adam, he plunks him down in the garden and says, yeah, just go give everything names. God created it all, but none of it had names. And so there's this idea that there's a pre-existent world, and what we humans do is just going around giving those things names. But the thing about it is, if you look really deeply, like underneath that, the question is, give what names? And what I mean, I want to push you towards thinking that, like thinking about this. So the idea would be that there's just, well, if we're in the Garden of Eden, right? If that's the myth, if we're in the Garden of Eden, right? Well, then there's the tree, right? The tree of knowledge, let's say. But there's a tree. But the idea is that before Adam gave it a name, it was, wait a minute. What was? What was before Adam gave it the name tree? Oh, you mean the tree? No, 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 no. You don't have the word yet. So you notice that there is this idea that things already exist and language is just a name for them. But if I take away your words, if I take away your language, how how do you think about this? Think about what? Because remember, you don't have the idea word tree yet. Now, again, the presumption, the Western presumption is the thing already exists. And the name is just sort of like literally a little label. Hi, my name is Tree, right? But what we need to kind of really think about from a Buddhist point of view, especially a tree, because a tree, you have the roots, you've got the trunk, you've got the limbs, you got the leaves, you have like all of this. And the idea is that the word tree is the word for like the whole the whole tree. Do you see what we keep coming up against? We need these words to think about things. And so the idea that there was already the thing before the word, it it doesn't actually, it's not honest. It's not being honest about the fact that you don't have the word yet. And so you actually don't even have the concept yet. And this brings me back to the mind of a baby. And the mind of a baby isn't thinking about algebra. isn't thinking about trees. It 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 doesn't have the language structure yet to do all of that. So Buddhism is very interested in language as samskara, as conditioning. That all it is this sort of like pencil, pencil, pencil. And then there's this conditioning so that when, ah, it just comes right to mind. And eventually, we forget that we're playing a language game and we actually think the language is referring to real things. Things in that sense. So, what I kind of wanted to get at was how what Kachana's saying about the caste system is just what people talk about. He's saying, yeah, it's a convention. It's a social convention. Yeah, you guys use this to like discriminate against each other. But at a deep karmic level, karma doesn't care about your language game, is kind of what Kachana's saying. And so I just wanted to kind of tie that in with a kind of slightly deeper philosophical level about language. Because again, Kachana is a very interesting figure in that way. Highly encourage you too, by the way, if you haven't if you haven't read Kachana's Sutta, the one in the Samyutta Nikāya that I was telling you about. I don't think, yeah, we didn't record all that workshop, did we, Gnome? Because I don't think it's on the YouTube.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so I'll have to do a Dharma doors on that sometime so we have it. But definitely read that if you're interested in Kachana. Fascinating sutta. All right, questions, comments, ideas about language? Anything really? Caste system? Yeah, Maria.
Well, first of all, isn't this what we're trying to practice in maybe something like Dzogchen or Zazen to like, so much of it is, I mean, the books are called Beyond Thinking, Beyond Language, and things like that. And then this sort of conversation always, every time this comes up, it makes me think of like, what what is that experience? And if that's what we're trying to practice, but like, can I think of examples of humans who might have had a similar experience just by sort of the way they were built? And I think of someone like Helen Keller and like her whole story, like prior to language, how she was just kind of like a mad person a little bit, right? So, or someone who just doesn't have language for whatever reason, they don't have language,
Mm-hmm.
faculties or whatever, what that experience might be like. So, I don't know. Those are the thoughts.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and there are lots of literature in the philosophy of language thinking about at a cognitive level, like thinking about what happens like if you don't teach a child language, by the way, like for example, like what does happen. It's kind of beyond this Dharma talk, but yeah, it's a very interesting idea. Yeah, yeah.
That makes me think of that movie Nell. You remember
Hmm.
Robert Jodie Foster? And
Yeah.
she was raised in the wild by a woman who was like, I want to say deaf, um, something like that. She didn't have language.
Yeah, yeah.
Interesting.
Robin.
I know it seems like there's two layers though, too. Like we're always putting symbolic layers onto an experience. It might be like, there's the experience of something, and then we we have the symbolism, well, what's the meaning? And, you know, so that, and maybe, is that the language where you could just have the experience without the language of, you know, putting the symbolism on it?
I hear you. See, my mind is immediately wanting to point at even the idea of an experience is already trapped in language. Because like, what is like the idea of an experience, but yeah, not experience, because I don't have that word yet. Oh, interesting. And what I'm pointing at, Robin, is actually the way that this type of philosophy, like language philosophy, it starts to collapse in on itself because we're using language. And that's why it gets really tricky to talk about. But what I want to kind of like really quickly, I want to remind everybody of a really important, a very important idea. And it's related. It's not going to seem related, but it is, trust me. So there is a I've probably even mentioned it before, but there's a very famous essay article called What It's Like to Be a Bat. And it's by Nagel is the guy's last name. I can't remember his first name right now, but Nagel is the guy's name. It's one of the like most famous essays about sort of kind of what we're talking about, but it's one of the most famous essays about the nature of mind. And what he says is, and I'll give you the thesis really quickly. He says, you know, we have this idea of what it would be like to be a bat. And we humans would go, oh, well, a bat echolocates. So that would mean that it's like I'm screaming and hearing the thing bounce off the walls. Oh, and I don't have arms, I have wings. Oh, and I'm not 6 feet tall, I'm actually really small. Oh, and what the guy gets at the essay is that the very idea of trying to think about what it's like to be a bat is impossible because you will always only be thinking of it as a human with wings, as a human echolocating, as a human who has shrunk down to the size of a rodent. Do you see what I mean? Like, to actually be a bat would be to be a bat. Like, and so the very idea of trying to think about what it's like to be a bat is impossible. I relate that in terms of like even trying to think about what it's like to be without language. Never in that way. Do you see my point? I certainly couldn't communicate it. We could arguably not talk about it, but then there might be such an experience. So if I haven't made myself clear, I'm not denying a kind of languageless experience, but it's not this. If you see what I mean. So, and by the way, if someone had such a languageless experience, they'd be hard pressed to tell you about it. You would be hard pressed to explain it to yourself, meaning you would be hard pressed to have any kind of discursive linguistic conversation with yourself about what it was like to be languageless. Do you see how language just keeps getting in the way in that sense? So truly, Robin, I mean, these are then just experiences, for lack of a better term, right? All right, that was fun, everybody. Oh, yeah, Jordan, please, rock it.
Hey everybody. Um, I just had a couple thoughts. Um, I think I've heard this sutta before, maybe from a teacher I used to have, but it just reminds me of like how much of a revolutionary the Buddha was at the time, because he was like really like anti-establishment, and I hear this sutta, and I just feel like it's an argument for equality, um, and I feel like this, the system or whatever has us in little categories like we're talking about, and they use that to keep control, and I'm wondering if that's part of the reason why Buddhism kind of died out in India, because I don't know, I was kind of a question, because I know that the Buddha taught, and then it kind of like died out for a while, and then kind of got brought back recently. So those are just some thoughts that I had. So thanks for bringing this one to us, Michael.
My pleasure, Jordan. Indeed, this is a radical sutta. It's taught a lot to point at how radical the Buddha was in terms of like the caste system and all of that. Couldn't agree more, Jordan, in terms of how radical it is and important it is even for our culture and society in that way. I would want to make one point, Jordan, just to piggyback off your comments. What we want to notice, though, and I know this is only one sutta and there's others, we want to notice, though, that the Buddha does not come at the caste system like with a hammer. It's a very truly kind of peaceful approach where he's just kind of opening up a little escape valve and saying, come on, everybody, like get out over here. And it's not this violent attack on the social order. And I actually think that that's really wise in that way, in terms of kind of yin and yang. And if you come at something with yang, you're going to get yang right back at you. So, yeah. All right, everybody. Let's call it a night. Call it another sutta.